First of all, congratulations on making it to the top group. You guys should be very proud of yourself. My name is Darcy Kern. I'm a professor of history at Southern Connecticut State University, also an alumna of the program.
Hi, everyone. Congratulations. Looking forward to a great conversation today. My name is Tom Vance. I'm a professor of education at Kansas State University.
Good morning. I'm glad to see you guys again. I remember you well. My name's Rita McCannon. I'm a lawyer in Huntsville, Alabama.
Hi, we are Unit 3 from Wauwatosa West, the state champions of Wisconsin. I'm Miles Coppage.
I'm Ellie Schultz.
I'm Ryan Reynolds.
I'm Savannah Williams.
And I'm Jenna Bokenhauer, and we're here on behalf of our teaching assistants, mentors, and teacher, Mr. Chad Mateski.
Great, thank you. We are going to ask you question 1. I'm going to read the question and then ask you to give us your statement. So, Oliver Wendell Holmes said, "I do not think the United States would come to an end if we lost our power to declare an act of Congress void. I do think the Union would be imperiled if we could not make that declaration as to the laws of the several states. What impact has judicial review had on federalism? Is judicial review a counter-majoritarian practice? Please support your position. What limits, if any, would you place on the practice of judicial review?" You may begin.
James Madison wrote in Federalist 39 that the Supreme Court would decide disputes between the state and federal government. His prediction was right. The courts have had a significant impact on federalism throughout history through the exercise of judicial review. Our panel agrees that the practice has drastically expanded federal power while limiting state autonomy.
The Supreme Court solidified judicial review in 1803 in Marbury v. Madison, which began the increase in the power of the federal government. In the early 1800s, the Supreme Court increased federal power through judicial review in cases such as Gibbons v. Ogden and McCulloch v. Maryland, which broadly interpreted Congress's power under the Commerce Clause and the Necessary and Proper Clause, respectively.
Following the Civil War, the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Due Process Clause in the 14th Amendment created the doctrines of incorporation and substantive due process, fundamentally altering the structure of federalism. The first substantive due process case was Lochner v. New York in 1905, allowing the federal government to recognize natural rights not specified in the Constitution. The first incorporation case was Gitlow v. New York in 1925, incorporating the First Amendment rights of free speech and press onto the states.
When the Supreme Court struck down New Deal legislation in the 1930s, President Franklin Roosevelt threatened to pack the court until the switch in time that saved 9 in West Coast Hotel v. Parrish. During the New Deal era, the Supreme Court would continue to expand federal power through cases such as Wickard v. Filburn, which dramatically broadened the interpretation of the Commerce Clause. Though historically the court has expanded federal power, we recognize in the past 25 years, the court has used judicial review to limit federal power, beginning with cases such as U.S. v. Lopez, which limited the reach of the Commerce Clause, and Prince v. U.S., which limited the reach of the Necessary and Proper Clause.
We agree that the practice of judicial review is counter-majoritarian, yet it is beneficial to a democratic republic. The judicial appointment process laid out in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 is inherently counter-majoritarian, as judges are not elected by the people, but rather appointed and confirmed by politicians. However, counter-majoritarianism serves to check tyranny of the majority, which is essential to a functioning democratic republic, particularly in a Madisonian democracy. Aristotle recognized the benefits of an aristocracy, in which virtuous rule by individuals of the highest order is best suited to establish policy. Though our federal courts do not establish policy, judicial review allows them to interpret the constitutionality of legislation, which in turn affects policy.
The founders' study of the failures of direct democracy in ancient Athens taught the importance of limiting the majority. Vanderbilt law professor Susanna Sherry recognized the importance of a counter-majoritarian Supreme Court when she discussed the importance of lifetime judicial appointments, allowing them to better protect rights free from the wrath of the majority.
As a panel, we would not place any additional limits on judicial review, as we believe the current limitations are sufficient. The Case and Controversy Clause requires cases to be brought to federal courts, limiting their jurisdiction and prohibiting advisory opinions. As Hamilton explained in Federalist 78, the Supreme Court has no influence over either the sword or the purse, limiting the impact of judicial review. This can be seen in President Andrew Jackson's disregard in the decision in Worcester v. Georgia and the enforcement of the Indian Removal Act.
Amendments ratified through Article 5 can overturn Supreme Court decisions as seen with the ratification of the 13th Amendment overturning Dred Scott v. Sanford. Moreover, the federal courts limit themselves. In Baker v. Carr, the Supreme Court ruled that the federal courts should not deal directly with issues the Constitution lays out for Congress, enhancing the political question doctrine.
The judiciary was created with the intention of interpreting the Constitution and the constitutionality of law. Judicial review is a crucial check on the majority's ability to pass unconstitutional laws. As Chief Justice John Marshall stated in Marbury v. Madison, it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. This concludes our statement. We are now ready for your follow-up.
Great, thank you. You talked about how the Supreme Court has changed over the years in its rulings. I wonder if you could speak about how theories of constitutional interpretation influence judicial review.
Many times, theories of constitutional interpretations have influenced judicial review through whether they directly look at the direct citation of the Constitution or they look at it such as a living document. One of these examples is when the judicial branch made a de facto change to the Constitution, labeling in the slaughterhouse cases, labeling the necessary and proper clause or Article 4, Section 2 dormant because it only applied to the federal government. And this was an interpretation where they looked directly at the citation of the Constitution.
We can also see the courts using the Constitution as a living document through the 14th Amendment incorporation doctrine. This can be seen through substantive due process and through the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. We can see this through substantive due process in the case Loving v. Virginia, where the courts decided that the ban of interracial marriage was unconstitutional. And ultimately, I would not be sitting here today talking to you without that decision.
I believe my colleague meant that the decision in the slaughterhouse cases ruled that the privileges and immunities clause of the 14th Amendment only applied to federal citizenship and not state citizenship.
Your opening statement seemed to suggest that the court, through interpretation, has tipped the division of power between the national governments and the states toward the national government. In your view, have they gone too far? Has the Supreme Court gone too far and given too much power to the national government?
We can see this, that yes, the Supreme Court has gone too far with the court case Bush v. Gore, where the state of Florida in the presidential election of 2000 ruled that they had to recount the votes. However, the Supreme Court ruled that they weren't allowed to do this, and this overstepped their boundaries, and it should have been left up to Florida as a state.
Another time we can see this is the case Miranda v. Arizona, where the Supreme Court made the speech for police officers and they had no say in what they're going to say, and this effectively legislated from the bench.
They've also gone too far in Shelby County v. Holder, which led to laws being passed that restricted people from voting. This can be seen when Texas put into effect stricter voter ID laws only hours after the decision was made.
While many anti-federalists, including Robert Dobbs and Robert Yates in Brutus 12 and 13, showed their fears of judicial sovereignty, and as my colleagues have stated, their fears have played out through legislating from the bench. Anti-federalists also advocated for an inclusion of the Bill of Rights into the Constitution, which also includes the 9th Amendment, stating that there are unenumerated rights that aren't enumerated in the Constitution, and the judiciary branch has done an excellent job of recognizing these rights, seen in cases such as Gibbons v. Ogden, when they recognize the right of privacy.
One quick.
I believe my colleague meant to say Griswold v. Connecticut when they recognize the right to privacy.
One quick follow-up question. Can you derive any principles by which the Supreme Court should use to decide whether or not to rule in favor of national power or state power?
I believe the Supreme Court should use the principles in the Constitution, the written words, such as with the Commerce Clause. It states that Congress can regulate commerce among the several states, and this is why I believe Wickard v. Filburn was incorrectly decided, as Wickard as Wickard's wheat was grown for himself and for personal use, and it would not have been an effect on interstate commerce, though the court decided so.
While many of the framers recognize that the judiciary has to be independent from a political opinion and from the other branches of government, especially seen through life, tenure, and good behavior in Article 3, Section 1, many times the judiciary can make the perceived right decisions when they base it on a perceived public mood. And this can be seen in Justice Thurgood's opinion in Milliken v. Bradley, in which he states that the opinion was more based on a perceived public mood and not one based on neutrality of law.
I noticed that there's more comments, but let's move on. Duly noted, participation, very good, and we'll move on to the next question.
Senator Ted Cruz has written a book where he talks about how the Supreme Court can affect history. When a seat is changed for whatever reason, death of a justice, retirement of a justice, can changing that single Supreme Court seat change history?
No, changing that single seat cannot decide history, as in cases such as Roe v. Wade, which is a monumental case ruling that when states could regulate a women's rights in abortion, was decided 7-2. So I believe that these monumental cases, as long as if they are really fundamental, are ruled heavily in a majority and not decided on a 5-4 slim line.
Ultimately, it doesn't matter whether the new justice is acquired, as seen when President Grant appointed Justice Earl Warren or Justice John Paul Stevens to the court, and he was a registered Republican. However, throughout his time in court, through his more centrist views, he has many times ruled in the liberal favor.
I believe that we can also see that one justice can change things, and that we need to have more political diversity on the court, and that despite only winning one of the last popular votes, currently 6 of the 9 Supreme Court justices were nominated by Republican presidents, showing that the court does not represent the body as well, or people.
Yes, one seat can change a decision, which is why there is this comment which is why we have this conversation of packing the courts right now. Although we should not pack the courts, because although I do support having more diversity on the courts on all bases, both politically and apolitically, as I align myself with Justice Elena Kagan when she stated, we look at institutions and see people who look like ourselves and who we imagine share the same set of values. And when this occurs, we feel more comfortable.
I can't hear you, Rita.
That was fine. They were concluding their answer with me. I didn't know if you had another follow-up.
Yeah, I do. Could you guys have mentioned the Commerce Clause really several times. Could you talk about how the Commerce Clause has changed in the last 25 years? The application of the Commerce Clause has changed from Rehnquist to Roberts.
Well, ultimately, in the case NFIB v. Sebelius, the Affordable Care Act attempted to pass the individual mandate through the Commerce Clause. However, this was deemed unconstitutional in FIB v. Sebelius.
In US v. Lopez, the federal Congress tried to pass legislation banning guns in school zones under the Commerce Clause, but under the Rehnquist court, they ruled that this was not under the Congress's power, as it did not have a significant effect on interstate commerce.
Another case that we have mentioned before is the case Wickard v. Filburn, which is dealing with the Commerce Clause in the Agricultural Act, and that Wickard's right to uphold wheat was violated through the Commerce Clause.
Judicial review over state law seems clear from the text of the Constitution. Judicial review over national law is not so clear. Historians disagree about whether the founders really intended national judicial review. What's your opinion?
I aligned myself with George Mason, who said that it is important for the judicial review to be used. However, if they are ruling on cases that are unconstitutional, it should not be withheld.
Yes, the founders did intend for judicial review to be left up to the federal government, as I align myself with Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 78, where he stated the interpretation of the laws is the proper and peculiar province of the courts.
Ultimately, these quasi amendments created through judicial review decisions such as Brown v. Board of Education, which established the right to equal education among all Americans, is important and overrules national law, because with the Article 6, Section 2, or the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, it states that it is the highest law of the land.
Federalist Alexander Hamilton also said in Federalist 78 that the people should be over the legislation, and we can see this with the court case Tinker v. Des Moines, where they ruled in favor of the students' rights rather than the school district's rights.
Great. Thank you guys very much. You did a great job.
Thank you.
I just very quickly, I thought you guys knew your court cases very well. I thought you worked very well together, and I think the holding the hands up really helps. But you should be very proud of yourself. This was excellent. You had very solid examples for every question we asked.
I agree, and I've always had I get heartburn when students roll out cases and cases and they don't really know what they're about. And you even came back to one or two of them and mentioned details about the case, and that made an old lawyer feel better.
Super impressive performance. Wow, that was really, really good. Being able to take those ideas and think on your feet and marshal a good response. One thing going forward for your classmates that may be listening, or for your teacher to share with your classmates, one level of impressiveness above your already impressive performance is being able to take those specific examples and make a generalization about them. So for example, with the division of power question between the national government and the state governments, what kinds of things should play into a justice's thinking when they're deciding those kinds of cases? Yes, the text of the Constitution, I heard that. That was good. Absolutely. But we also, the text of the Constitution also leaves us open to some interpretation. So what kind, really the question could be, what kinds of things do we want to nationalize in terms of our Constitution? And those are the things where we should, like rights, right? The Bill of Rights, incorporation, as you mentioned, and so forth. So the really important things need to be nationalized. Excellent, excellent job.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.